Good evening, good afternoon. We're early tonight because of the RTM. I'd like to call the meeting to order with a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'd like to first thank the members of the board. I've made an adjustment. I put one of the new business items as item number 2 because of guests, and I hope you understand why I did that, and hopefully it'll work out to my favor. But being that one of our ex-members is one of the people who may be speaking, and we need to involve him. We know I'd be home for the 4th of July for the cookout. And, oh, no, I'm sorry. Mr. Chadwick, everybody welcome. So I will move on right now, and I'll start the item off, item number 2, with Mr. Drake.
Thank you. Today, the Investment Advisory Committee voted 4-0 in favor of resolutions, which Ms. Tarkington of the Law Committee will read later. But the Investment Advisory Committee adopted the same resolutions as the Law Committee to enable and favorably go forward with the necessary documents and the change of moving the management of the retirement fund to outside managers, Neuberger Berman. We acted based on recommendation from Gene McLaughlin in writing dated today, and that of Attorney Ted Smoot, who's with us here, whose letter was dated June 8th, who reviewed this contract and favorably recommended it. You know, this discussion has been a long one. It's been going on for months. The question of should these funds be managed in the present scheme or in an alternative scheme by an outside manager. I think what everyone is after here is an improvement of the process and an improvement of the performance. The performance has been good recently, but we could always do better. A third thing that I think has been an objective of this action is to add an outsider as a fiduciary responsible party. And Neuberger Berman, I think the retirement board under charter, the individuals are, the board has fiduciary responsibility, but here, Neuberger Berman will additionally. So this long discussion really was an initiative of the retirement board. It's not an initiative of the BET. The charter requires the BET to approve the contract and also the designation of the party, the Neuberger Berman. So that's what's before us here. So since it's an initiative of the retirement board, I'd be happy to, or if the chairman wishes, to invite the members of the retirement board at whose initiative this is undertaken to speak. But those were the actions of the Investment Advisory Committee.
Please, welcome.
Good evening. The retirement board has spent years, if you will, tussling with town politics. And it seems to us that it would be a better alternative if we were to turn these assets, the management of these assets, over to a party outside of the town. I think that we will have things happen more quickly, and that I'm not sure that we're going to get any better performance, to be perfectly honest about it. I think we all know the statistics that 90% of all managers underperform the stock market. And so to turn this over to someone else, as we've been able to pick 1 out of 10, that may or may not be true. However, I think that having spent a year to get one investment through the law department sort of set the stage for us as to how slowly things work around here. And I think that in running money, you don't need to be in the office and doing something every day, but it does help to be reasonably able to alter your investments if you want to. We went through a process of putting out an RFP for this position, and we had 13 responses to that We then went through, each of us on the board, grading these 13 respondents. We came down with 3 who were, scored higher than any of the rest by a significant margin. So we've asked the 3 of them to come in and make another presentation to us. And of those 3, Neuberger Berman was the one that appealed to us most. I think we've had Neuberger back once, twice, 3 times, I don't know, since then to iron things out with them. We put together this contract, which speaks to this definition of eternity at this place. And as Bill has said, it's got the approval of the Law Committee, it's got the approval of the Investment Committee, it's got the approval of the Law Department, and it's got the approval of the board. And so it is our recommendation to the BET that we sign this contract and turn management of the assets over to Neuberger Berman.
If I may, discussion, questions for Mr. Chadwick?
Do you want me to do this now? Or
No, I'd like to focus on the investments versus the legal side. Ms. Weissler?
I certainly support the concept of turning it over. I know that all of you have done a great deal of due diligence. I just had 2 questions related. One, as we know, our hurdle rate, I guess, is 6.75%. Does Neuberger feel, in the context of looking at our investment policy statement and sort of how they're looking at the markets, that's achievable? That's the first question. The second is a little bit more of a related to the agreement, and I'm looking at the red line version of the agreement, which I think it's on page 28. It refers to a complementary manager program. And regarding that, it talks about there's a 90 basis point fee for common stocks, convertible bonds, cash and cash equivalents. And I just wanted to understand what's encompassed in that item number 3 on page 28.
Okay. Joe Pellegrino got the enviable job of working on the fee schedule with Neuberger Berman, so I'm going to let him answer that question.
And the hurdle rate, John, is to? All of it? Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to see all of you again. Nancy, my sense, I won't speak for Neuberger Berman, but in our discussions, I came away with a level of comfort that that's an achievable rate within today's markets. As you know, we still will need to revisit the investment policy statement once this is, if this is approved. And in the course of that, I think what we will specifically discuss is the composition of the portfolio that they'll recommend and implement in light of that hurdle rate. As a trustee, my own view is we made significant changes to the assumptions of the plan, I believe, last year, and I think it would be very wise, prudent, to allow those assumptions to work out over some period of time now before you revisit that. So I am comfortable with the hurdle rate. Now, I say that because I know that your chief and principal function is to be able to have a budget and have predictability and have a sense of what's going on. I think one of the most important reasons why we're undertaking this, and I'll get to it in a moment, but one of them is to try to achieve a very clear understanding of what the contributions will be, hopefully have much better performance, and that ultimately will lead to less of a burden on the taxpayers going forward.
And the question.
Did that help with that question?
That answers with that question, thank you.
The second one,
Yeah.
I'm also going to bring up our attorney.
Oh, okay.
On the fees. I just want, because I want him to be very clear, because I've gone through this so many times that I want to have first Ted Smoot explain exactly that section, and then I'll be glad to comment.
Thank you.
And while I was looking for the section, I'm not sure I got the exact question.
Page 28,
Right.
section 3 there. I wanted to understand what's included in this complementary manager program. The way it read, it was as if we're being charged 90 basis points for investments in common stocks, cash, and cash equivalents, but maybe I'm not understanding it.
No,
Maybe
you-
that's a small slice of what we would be doing.
No, you're exactly right, and that raised questions for us all, is what is this program and why are you charging more for
Right.
this program?
Right.
What the program is Neuberger has an ability to find, they use InvestNet, which is a third-party manager diligence firm, to find third-party managers of the money, so an unaffiliated manager that they think might be good. They might say, hey, this person is performing, this shop is doing really well, we should put some of the money there. And that's what this would be. We were not totally comfortable with that, probably for the same reasons you are, as well, why all of a sudden are the fees increased. So what we said was, look, if you guys really think that there's an independent manager out there that you're really recommending, come back to us, tell us who it is, and you can't do that without our consent.
Okay.
So these fees do kick in, but only after the board's had a chance to review, decide whether it's the path they want to go, and I think revisit the fees at that point in time.
Okay, all right, it just seemed high.
Yep, no, I completely
All right,
agree.
thanks.
You, Ms. Tarkington, followed by Mr. Turner.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, do you want me to read the resolutions at this point in time and then offer some support?
No, actually, as I said, I'd like to focus on the investment, the contract, the whole concept, and then we can get into the legal end of it, you know,
Okay.
after we get through that discussion.
So you want me to go over the contract a little bit then?
Yeah, if you have discussions on the contract or, you know, the overall big picture of what we're doing, I know Mr. Turner had his hand up. I just want everybody to have a chance to ask these members about the contract, the rates, the fees, the terms, all of that.
Right. So let me talk a little bit about the contract, because we started our law committee meeting on the 5th of June and just asked Ted to lay out the important issues for us, and then he went through some sub-issues. It was really a well worthwhile session, and so there have been actually two investment advisory committee meetings since then, plus a joint one today. And so at last Friday's meeting, on the 9th, once again asked Ted to do the same thing for the investment advisory committee. But the letter lays out similarly some of these same issues. So it's very important that this board understand the letter that Ted has written, and Ted is a partner with Patterson, Belknap, Webb, and Tyler in New York. And the critical issues here is that we're handing the funds in our pension fund over to a manager, to Neuberger Berman, who will have full discretion and authority to invest and manage the assets. So again, there are terms of conditions, and there's certainly a policy statement that the board has delivered already. It's an exhibit to this agreement. And Neuberger Berman has said that it should be updated at least annually. The current one is about 18 months old. The next major point here is that the manager is a fiduciary to the retirement board and has agreed to basically represent solely the interests of the retirement system. Another successful negotiation is that State Street Bank and Trust, which is the current custodian, remains the independent custodian for the assets. And that really enhances the opportunity of the retirement board either to remain with Neuberger Berman, or if it's some later date they choose to move, to add flexibility there. Again, we've talked here about the fees. I think that you basically negotiated the fees down from the original RFP. I think that's an important point here to note, that they are less than originally bid because of the successful negotiations. The Neuberger Berman has also agreed to indemnify and hold harmless the retirement board, retirement system, et cetera, and each of them, and against any and all losses and liabilities of whatever kind or nature. Again, very importantly. And finally, the retirement board can terminate the services, according to this agreement, by giving notice to the manager, to Neuberger Berman, and there is no time frame. It's effective immediately. On the other hand, Neuberger Berman can resign, but they have to give 90 days' notice. So these are some of the critical issues. I mean, certainly we went through the covenants, many of the reps and warranties. We spent a lot of time on these kind of issues, but these are the critical issues that, again, outlined in the letter which Ted has presented to the board. and on which our law department has presented the board with a cover letter to that effect, offering, again, Ted really represents the interests of the retirement board, and our town attorney and G. McLaughlin, the interests of the town. So we have both of them, very comfortable. Everyone's been involved and worked, I believe, very cooperatively, and quite frankly, been impressed by Ted's commitment to making sure this gets done thoroughly and in a timely manner, and certainly kept us all working on double time on the weekends.
That was her way of saying thank you for making everybody work on the weekends. Mr. Turner?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, as a member of the Investment Advisory Committee, I thought I would share just a few more observations that we made in the committee as to the business rationale behind outsourcing this. First, needless to say, in the investment world, things are constantly changing. Globalization of financial markets is certainly one of those. And in addition to, obviously, the ultimate goal of performance, is we did look at some other things. One is the heightened fiduciary pressures that we see across the board today, particularly in the nonprofit arena. Secondly, assessing opportunities globally is becoming more and more difficult. And with globalization of markets, we need to recognize that there may be, from time to time, opportunities to invest offshore. And the only way to do that, of course, is with a money manager of scale, as is Neuberger Berman. And the other component of the business rationale that we looked at was products. The products to invest in today are very complex, or can be, and at the same time, we need to have the expertise that can look at products, understand their complexity, make the determination as to whether we should be in those products, but most importantly, move very, very quickly. So I felt very good, and I would echo Ms. Tarkington's comments about the teamwork. I felt we all did a phenomenal job in coming together with volumes of work against tight deadlines. But again, I wanted to share some of the additional thinking and rationale behind the business component of the recommendation that's before the full BET today.
Thank you so much. Mr. Norton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a registered investment advisor, I'm going to speak on behalf of the decision that is being made by the retirement board, and hopefully in a few minutes endorsed by this board. I think this is the right thing to do. I think the only way to manage $400 and almost $500 million of other people's money is through the professional marketplace, where you have people under the authority of the Investment Advisors Act of 1940 and the other securities regulations that apply. I think we went through a very detailed process. I was involved quite intimately with the beginning last Monday evening. I've attended 4 meetings since that time. I heard the presentation that was made in the law committee last Monday evening. Our committee met the Investment Advisory Committee met on 3 occasions subsequent that. And also involved in that process, I want to thank Tony Turner for bringing to our attention some compliance issues, which is very crucial to any of those of us who manage other people's money. I live with compliance issues on a daily basis, as I believe every other investment advisor does. So that both my compliments to the retirement board, and I certainly hope that our vote here is unanimous in supporting this effort by the retirement board.
Mr. Drake, followed by Mr. Blankley.
I just would like to add a couple of facts that perhaps we should all be aware of in support of this. And we got in our, by the way, the gentleman from Newburgh, Mr. D'Amato, and the other gentleman from Neuberger Berman have arrived. Thank you for coming. We have in our package a very quick calculation of the fees, which is a simple calculation and is accurate as far as it goes. It's not the whole picture. Maybe I could provide a little elucidation on that. In particular, the fee is 8 basis points, but on the privates, the private market investments, those that we retain, or the runoff of what we presently are committed to, is 4 basis points for the first 5 years. But the private markets program put forward by Newburgh Berman, which I think impressed everybody who listened to it, our presentations of it, is 70 basis points plus 5 to 10% of the gains over an 8% hurdle. You know, on our $90 million of private market money, that's 630,000. The 70 basis points is 630,000 annually, which is much more than is presented in this simple presentation of the 8 basis point fee. The other thing that maybe deserves to be remarked upon is, you know, we went through here at the BET a change in our procedures to simplify it, our cooperation with the retirement board, and we did that all a year ago in a unanimous vote, and that was great. We haven't ever tested it because since it was passed, there haven't been any agreements submitted, so all that good work was sort of became moot. But it still applies. It's a procedure, and under that procedure, we're here. The point of that procedure that we all worked on was that the primary responsibility for the management of these funds is with the retirement board, and that's why this initiative comes from them, and I think it deserves our support. We, in our clarifying the governance, we clarified that it rests with you, and that's why I think this board today should approve what we have in front of us. Just to touch upon the performance, I think the word for the performance over the last year, the only word, I think the performance has been extraordinary. Mr. Chadwick and Mr. Pellegrino, you can wave and verify for me, but I think the figures are that for calendar 16, the performance of the town's funds, and those numbers are 5-year returns through April, 8%, 5 years, it's over our 6 3/4% hurdle. And for 1 year, 14.3%, that's again through April, that those those performance figures are excellent. And I think it was stated that our calendar 2016 performance was in the first percentile of comparable funds, not the 99th or the 50th or the 30th, the first out of 100. That's extraordinary performance. So we don't have a performance problem here. We have high hurdles for the new managers. But I would say, Mr. Chadwick, if you were back in your prior career as an institutional money manager and you had that record to run upon, you'd get your contract renewed, wouldn't you?
You couldn't afford me.
That's John's way of saying the fees would be high.
And how much do you make for this task? So I think the performance has been excellent. The challenge, the standards are high, but I think proper governance and the proper thing to do here is to approve this contract.
If I may make a comment there, Bill. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I do think we owe John a debt of gratitude. He took on a very difficult job many years ago, and it's been a process of change. Change sometimes can be slow. But I thought he did an admirable job with where we are today. I'd also be remiss if I didn't say we have 3 of the senior members of Newburgh Berman with us today, and I do think, Mr. Chairman, it would be wise to at least meet them and bring them into the conversation. We have Joe Amato here, who's actually the president of Newburgh Berman Group, as well as the chief investment officer of equities. We have Ed Berman, who's here as the senior vice president, and we also have Mike Savinelli here, who's the senior client manager. As an aside, if I may, for one moment, I want to make special thanks to all the members of the BET who were involved in this process. We had Tony, Leslie, Bill, Art, John, Beth, and all of them made it a better product. They asked all the right questions. They really challenged us on what we were thinking about, and I happen to think that this was a process that is for the best interest of the town, for the taxpayers. I also think it's in the best interest of the employees and ultimately for the retirees. Having a healthy, sound program that can be managed now by a world-class firm that has the talent, the day-to-day involvement in the markets, the ability to see the scope of opportunities that, frankly, I don't believe that we're able to see, and have decisiveness in moving the money where they really believe it should be moved to. I think these are huge pluses in the world that we live in today, and it's a different world today investment-wise, because of the changes that have taken place in technology, because of the way money has been aggregated in different hands on the street, all these reasons, this is absolutely, in my judgment, the best thing for the plan, and I have confidence that we have an outstanding firm representing us going forward.
Thank you. I would like to welcome you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Anytime, if you would like to join in, this is a sort of an open discussion on this. I'm just going through my members. We have a two-part problem. We have to have the conversation on the investment, and we have to have the legal contract side of it, which we'll get to in a minute or two. But my next speaker was Mr. Blankley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start off my remarks by echoing what has been said already about the return that we've achieved on these funds under Chairman Chadwick. And in fact, when we first came to look at this matter and when I first reviewed it, I did actually wonder whether there would be any benefit to our moving away from the excellent returns that we have enjoyed under his leadership. Two of my reasons for thinking that we should make this move, and I support it wholeheartedly, by the way, is that this is the kind of return which I believe is sustainable over time, probably only by going to an outside manager, particularly if we can get an outside manager, as Mr. Pellegrino said, of the high quality of Neuberger Berman. The other part is the slowness alluded to by Mr. Chadwick in our internal process. And it is remarkable, actually, that we have achieved the returns that we have, given the slowness sometimes in making moves once we had decided to wait in particular areas or invest in particular private equity investments. So all the greater credit, I think. But in terms of ongoing management going forward and the sustainability of management going forward, outsourcing is, to my mind, the way that we should definitely be going. And saving the presence of the gentleman here, let me say from my own personal business perspective, when I was on the other side selling stocks and bonds in the corporate life that I enjoyed once, we always knew there were 2 or 3 firms where you had to be very careful, very well prepared, and Neuberger Berman was at the top of that list. So I support this initiative completely.
Thank you. Anybody else on the, Mr. Kramer?
Two small questions, if I can. One, the law department is recommending the contract. I noted that some of the exhibits, they didn't appear to be very important exhibits, but I noted that some of the exhibits were blank. I'd take a small measure of comfort from the law department just to confirm to me that they're recommending a contract that has a few blanks, but that's under control. You have a sense of what's going in there and that we know how it's going to work.
So Jeff, let me just say that if I could have made a comment, the whole contract is about 1,000 pages.
Okay.
We shared you all the pain and limited to like 30 some odd pages. But, those 1,000 pages were sent to Beth and me multiple times. So we have been through the additional exhibits, and just because they weren't shared with all the members of the board, we'd be happy to supply you a copy with all the exhibits.
No, spare me the 1,000 pages. I'm happy to rely on the capable people around me who've looked at them. The only other question I had, Joe, which I think is a Joe question, if I can.
That's scary right there.
No. It's an easy one. I did ponder, at least briefly, although I'll definitely vote in favor of this, and partly out of a high regard for you, Joe. But the logic of including the private equities and compensating Neuberger Berman for this based on the private equities, which I don't have much sophistication in the area. I rely on people like John Chadwick and Joe Pellegrino, but it seemed to me that these were investments that we were locked into, committed to over long periods of time. We're not really relying upon any advice of an investment manager to assist us with that. It's simply an item in our portfolio that we pay may be paying a compensation on according to the formula in Exhibits C and C1. What was the logic by which that's included?
Succinctly, Jeff, I'd say I looked at it as an administrative cost. There's administrative cost still to your calls, being on top of the data of it, for them to review them and look at them. for us to sit down with them and actually think about, do we want to hold these to maturity? Is it possible that we would want to exit one or more of them? How would we exit them? Fair market value. That to me would be the succinct answer. The longer answer would be, we did go through at least one, if not two rounds of fee negotiations with them where they did lower this fee in particular by half. I thought, when I looked at the scope of it in its entirety, I felt it was a fair place to be. They gave, well, we gave something. I look at the relationship of one whereby you're essentially deciding that you have a quality of people who are going to get the job done for you. I want them to be incentivized to get the job done for us. And on the private equity side, I think we've got a lot of work that's going to need to be done going forward. I am deeply appreciative of the board, in particular Bill's comments, John and Art's, regarding the performance that we've had, and that's true. And I absolutely never say not anything but thank you. But when you looked at, if you looked at just our private investment performance off the top of my head, since inception, and that's not the original date of inception, but what we call inception, which is going back over 10 years, I think the returns on average have now been an annualized return somewhere around 7.15%. And candidly, when I talked to NEPC about that, it is not a great return. So I am concerned about the private equity portfolio. It doesn't mean that we're coming out of it, but this is an area that I would like our board, the retirement board, to work with Neuberger on and see if we can't do much better.
Thank you, Joe.
Got it.
Thank you. If I have no further discussion on that, I'd like to change the slight angle on this discussion. I'd like to call Ms. Tarkington. I want to make sure that I've put a lot of burden on the law committee, thank you, by the way, to make sure that the action we take is in keeping with the charter, and law departments helped us dramatically, and I think working with Mr. Schmutz. So, Ms. Tarkington, if you could move us to the legal side of this?
I will. Actually, one other thing that I should have mentioned in Mr. Smoot's letter was the fact that there is an affirmative statement that the members of the retirement board have read this document, because I think that's important in terms of understanding all the terms. So coming out of the law department.
All 1,000 pages.
What?
All 1,000 pages.
And it was pretty busy weekends, actually, Jeff. But basically, on June 5th, the Board of Estimate and Taxation, of the Town of Greenwich Law Committee actually approved these resolutions. We have taken these same resolutions and updated them for today's date, just to incorporate the additional meetings that were held by the IAC. So the Board of Estimate and Taxation resolutions dated June 12, 2017, regarding selection of Neuberger Berman Trust Company, N.A., a national banking association defined as Neuberger, as investment manager for the retirement system funds. So there are two resolutions, Mr. Chairman, that we should approve. Do you want to take them both at once, or do you want to handle them separately?
At your discretion.
Well, let's do them separately. Resolve that the full Board of Estimate and Taxation approves the contract between Neuberger and the Retirement Board as presented by Attorney Edward H. Smoot, special counsel retained by the Retirement Board for this purpose. This approval is based on the recommendation of the special counsel, Edward H. Smoot, and the Law Department approval of the contract pursuant to Town of Greenwich Charter, Section 208. And again, the Law Committee approved this resolution by a vote of 2-0. And I think...
So that resolution is moved on behalf of the Law Committee. Discussion?
No discussion other than to say the IAC approved the exact same thing.
Got it. So I'm going to put that 4-0, okay? Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Item is carried. Ms. Tarkington?
The second resolution is further resolved. The full Board of Estimate and Taxation approves the designation of Neuberger as the corporation trustee for the purpose of managing the retirement system funds under Section 208A of the Town of Greenwich Charter. Again, that was approved by the Law Committee by a vote of 2-0.
And also by the IAC unanimously.
Thank you. Discussion on that? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Those resolutions have carried. Mr. Pellegrino, Mr. Chadwick, thank you.
You did it again.
Are you
Gentlemen,
Are you telling me
thank
we're
you.
dismissed?
Hopefully, it's a long and prosperous relationship with the Town of Greenwich, or the Town of Greenwich Retirement Board. It has been quite a lengthy process for us, and it's been quite a challenge from 2008 dealing with the market change, so we look forward to this. And thank you.
Certainly, if I could just.
Please, please,
On behalf of.
please, please.
Because it's videotaped.
Now that you've approved it, I only have downside.
Right, yeah.
I thought you were really smart.
No, I just wanted to thank all of you for the opportunity to work with the Town of Greenwich. We're very excited about the opportunity. I know the team is going to work very hard. We think we have a range of capabilities across both public and private markets that I think can add value over time. And I would certainly commend Mr. Chadwick, Mr. Pellegrino, and the team on the investment committee have done a spectacular job over the course of the last number of years. I would certainly echo the sentiments of the prior comments. And that's no easy feat. The markets over the course of the last number of years, as all of us know from reading in the papers and watching markets, it's had its ups and downs. And to achieve the kind of returns and good outcomes that you've done for your constituents is commendable. So we have big shoes to fill in that sense, although we certainly view it as a real partnership with all of you and certainly the investment committee to work hard on your behalf. So thank you for the opportunity.
No, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Tarkington?
While we're thanking people, I really would like to thank, Joe and John, who participated with our committees, particularly over the last couple of weeks, but in particular, the cooperation between our own law department in terms of Gene McLaughlin and Ted Smoot, and it really operated as a team to expedite obviously, the approval of this in a very short time relative to anything that this board has seen in a long time. So they really were very supportive and really a great team, and I want to thank Ted and the others.
Thank you. I'll probably have a few more comments in my chairman's report, but I'm looking at our town attorney, and thank you, Mr. Fox. And I know you know what that means. So with that, continuing on, I'd like to deviate from our agenda if I may. I have a request for an executive session for an update on a legal settlement from Attorney Ahmad
So I move that we go into executive session?
for the purpose of,
For the purpose of discussion of legal, pending legal claims?
do I have a second?
Yes, for me.
Seconded by Mr. Raymer. Everybody was begging at that point, Callie, to get out. Thank you. Okay, continuing on with our interesting agenda tonight. That brings us to item number 3, our routine applications. Mr. Drake.
We have 3 routine applications tonight. The first one is SC 19 comes from the First Selectman, a settlement of Chubb Group versus Town of Greenwich and Roberti. The amount is $20,253.05. The second one is SE 20, also a settlement of litigation against the town with Balone. The amount is $10,437.58. And the third item is LAW 2 from the Law Department, which is $13,000, which is a transfer.
Okay, our routine applications, do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Tarkington. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? On our capital carry-forward requests, you'll notice they're not routine or non-routine. I'm going to call on Mr. Drake to move us through those, and I will entertain discussion if anybody has on any particular one or on them as a group at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The items are PR1 from the Parks and Recreation Department, which is a $100,000 capital carry forward for Binney Park improvement. The second one is PR2, $35,000, a carry forward item for the Greenwich Point Master Plan. PR3, $1,334,000, a capital carry forward item for the repair of the Greenwich Point Causeway. The fourth one is PR4, $260,000, capital carry forward for the replacement of the Byram launch ramp. followed by PW1 from Department of Public Works, $200,000 at capital carry forward for the Byram Fire Station rehab design, and PW2, $170,000 at capital carry forward item for the Eastern Civic Center design.
Okay, those items have all been moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion. I'll open it up. Roland, with this item goes a sort of another item. This is the time of year we continue things in force and close out others. Do you have any idea what we're closing out?
$1.6 million.
Okay. Are there any items that we're not continuing in force, we're not closing out, and we're just letting them go, where they have to be reappropriated if needed? Do we have any of those items?
No. What will come next month is the closeouts for the B fund.
Okay,
We will reduce the authorization that's outstanding.
That doesn't involve cash.
okay, gotcha.
This is cash. What he's referring to is the 1.6. It goes from the Z fund, which is the capital projects which are not bonded,
Yep.
to the capital non-recurring fund. And if you see the treasurer's report, it brings that balance up to almost $10 million.
Gotcha. I guess my question is, are there capital projects, let me try it a different way. Some we're continuing forward another year. Some we're closing out the ones that are on the books, and the change is, the cash is going from there to there, as you say. Are there projects that have been appropriated, nothing to do with funding, that we just didn't get to, that we're not continuing in force, we're lapsing, we're not doing anything with?
No.
How is there a third category?
Because the capital projects in town, at the end of the second year, lapse if they haven't been started, encumbered. We're continuing ones that are in their first cycle for another year. And then sometimes there's capital projects that the department has had appropriated, they've not started them, and they just lapse, and if they decide to do the project, they go through the process again.
Right.
So that's my question. I want to know about how many of those there were. That's my concern.
And just in response to the good one that we all noted before was the lapse of the modular money from New Leb. Do we have
Correct.
to act on that?
No, that should just naturally happen, correct? But it has no, to Peter, what you're saying, it has no bearing because we didn't borrow the money or we're not using cash, so it has nothing to do with cash. But that modular appropriation should just, it just disappears. It comes right off the capital appropriation statement.
It'll just close out and be replaced on July 1 by the new equipment.
Gotcha, okay. Because I do get some questions on this. It's funny, some of these I had an email on in the last week or so on the causeway going into Greenwich Point. So I could say that the Capital on Barm Rehab Station, the first selectman is in the process of trying to have some conversations on that plan, so we'll hear more about that in the future. So, any other discussion? So I'm going to call this the capital carry request applications and vote on them as a whole if there's no objection. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? That item is carried. Have to move my paper clip. Brings us to Assessor's Report. Ms. Tarkington or Mr. Raymer, doesn't matter.
I'd like to move that we approve the assessor's report. I'd like to just mention for this board that the assessor is in court today, and because of the earlier time of our meeting, was not able to make it back from New Britain in time to make the earlier meeting.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the Assessor's Report?
Seconded.
Seconded by Mr. Raymer. Discussion? All those in favor?
Let me just add one thing if I can.
Okay.
Just to try your patience for a second, would everybody just turn to the last page for a moment? I'm going to have a conversation with you that I had previously with Leslie Tarkington and a conversation that I had with my own caucus, but I want to just bring it out at the attention publicly, because we hear a lot of facts relayed to us when we were under discussion on the economic marketing program. We saw it again with some articles that were passed around the BET, all of which were sort of in the nature of the values of real estate in Greenwich are falling off a cliff, you can't sell a house in Greenwich, et cetera. Just wanted to bring to your attention this last page. The lower chart, the bars are median value on houses sold month by month. The dot line where somebody's connecting the dots, those are average figures. Where you're looking at the averages, and then there's a red line, which is actually a poly recomposition using both sets of data. I'm not sure exactly how that was calculated, but looking at all three of these, just wanted to point out to me that although this does not segregate any price groupings, the over 10 millions as opposed to the under 1 million, it doesn't segregate any neighborhoods, but it does show you at the bottom chart that there's a steady increase of a few percentage points anyway, year to year over the last 4 years, 3 years rather, in Greenwich. Similarly, if you look at the upper chart, which is simply the number of closings recorded on the land records, something shows as a closing, as a property sold, whether it's sold for $1 or whether it's sold for $10 million. It just counts how many figures, how many transactions closed. If you take a look at that, you see there too that while there's sort of typical seasonal variations, one does not get an impression that the sheer quantity of closings is dropping off a cliff. That's not to say that the market here is meteoric either, but I just thought for a moment, you're seeing this every month, you'll see it every month in the future. I just wanted to dispel some of the scare talk that we've been hearing from various sources. These are the real data. And that's what you should be looking at and relying on as you give consideration to what's happening in our Greenwich marketplace. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So the first item is, can we get a vote on the assessor's report? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? While we're on the assessors, I would ask Mr. Raymer, Ms. Tarkington, you've completed the annual review on behalf of the BET?
We have, she just needs to.
We haven't filed it yet, but
Okay.
the work
Needs
is
to be
being-
signed.
Needs to be signed, and I should say, out of fairness, that 96% of the work was done by Mrs. Tarkington, and I thank her for her input.
Thank you, that's a good update. I'll have an update on another one coming up. Okay, so moving on, item number 5, Controller's Report.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, BET members. You all have a copy of the Controller's Report. I'll answer any questions contained within any of the sections at this point.
Can I begin with the question?
Mr. Norton, go right ahead.
I'm a little bit confused about the retirement board vote. I thought the vote was 401. Or are we talking about two different things here when we said the vote was voted 3-2 to hire Newberger Berman?
That was at that point in the process. They took a subsequent vote after they interviewed Newberger a second and a third time. And the final vote that went to the, before you for tonight at the last meeting was 401. The one abstention was from a member that only received the agreement that you've all seen that's been marked up many, many times the night before and just simply abstained because he didn't have the chance to read it. That was, to answer your question, that was an earlier vote.
That's what I thought. So the actual vote to hire Newberger Berman was 401.
I mean, as you all know, the chairman changed his mind. He was strongly against this, and for some reason, he came back, and now he's strongly in favor.
And I had a question, Peter. You have a comment here about bank reconciliation related to the credit card activity in the tax collector's office. Can you explain that? I just couldn't follow exactly what was going on there.
Yeah, yes, I can. As a result of the BET's budgetary cuts, 2 members of the tax collector's office were not laid off, but were transferred out, one to parking services and one upstairs to public works. One of the clerks was responsible for the credit card payments that come in every day, including Saturdays and Sundays. She had left in early April, and since she had left, none of the iCloud is the processor that records the credit cards. It had been put into the Munis system. Before it even goes into the Munis system, it has to be recorded in Quality Data Services system, which I think you're all familiar with through the assessor's reports over the years. The deputy tax collector had special training recently on how to record them. I wrote this report Friday morning, and as one of my chief accountant was leaving at around 11 o'clock after the report was done, 2 months were posted, and I actually, because she was out in the afternoon, I recorded all of the iCloud payments from the first or second week, I think it was April 17th, all the way through May 31st. But it's still not reconciled because at this point, when I wrote this report, the April bank reconciliation couldn't be reconciled. They have been posted through May 31st, so we'll be able to reconcile it, and hopefully we'll be able to
So it's
in next month's report. So it's just a matter of timing, and it queued up for 2 months where they simply weren't coming into finance.
Thank you.
Ms. Overlander, followed by Mr. Raymer.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to speak a little bit about the audit report. I wasn't sure whether you were going to take that up at a different time.
I have that under committee reports, under 7.
Okay,
So-
I'll wait for my comments then.
Mr. Raymer?
So the posting and the reconciliation was being done in finance? You were doing it personally? Is that what happened?
The credit cards, if someone comes in to pay over the counter, the clerical people record it, and like a bank teller, they reconcile the day. That was being done on a normal basis because they never left. They were always there. The person who was responsible for recording the credit card payments, which are not over the counter, left in early April, and that work had not been done through the time that she left in the middle of April. I think the day was April 17th. The deputy tax collector was not qualified to post them into the system, which is Quality Data Systems, until last week. He did all of them within a day. And Friday afternoon, as I said, after writing this report, I was able to post them all. The reason I'm doing it is because the person in the finance is out on workers' compensation, and I'm backing her up for the last 2 months.
And
So we're current with the postings.
And so, that reconciliation that you did was always being done by somebody in finance, not by somebody in the tax collector's office?
That's a different person. The person, my chief accountant posts to the Munis General Ledger. The bank reconciliation person works for the treasurer. She was getting the money in, getting the bank statements. The money was going into the bank, and we had nothing on the general ledger posted. We're current as of May 31st, so now we can do the reconciliation.
And the work that's being done in finance, in the finance department as opposed to the tax collector's department, is always work that was being done in the finance department?
No, it has to be imported from the tax collector's office. They feed the Quality Data Services.
Yeah, I'm sorry, maybe I'm being obtuse here. The only point I'm trying to drive at is we haven't shifted some of the work out of the tax collector's office over to the finance department.
No, and that's why it was delayed.
All right. The very last sentence, which appears at the top of page 6, maybe there's something missing. I didn't understand the sentence. We do not allow the credit card processor debit the tax collector account.
That the word
Is there
"to"
a
is
word-
missing.
What are the words that are missing?
Okay. To
Oh, to.
debit.
Oh, to debit.
debit.
Okay, thank you.
Further on the controls report, Ms. Moriarty?
I just wanted to ask for clarification, because I know your monthly report often refers to the delay in the resolution of all the Sandy reimbursements we are expecting from FEMA. Your wording this month makes it sound that we're a little bit more hopeful it may come in sooner rather than later. Is there new information on that?
The answer is no. The former risk manager comes in once a week now. He's down to once a week, and any week now he'll be gone. He was the person responsible for the final filing of the paperwork. My optimism was based on the fact that a month ago he told me we're done. We don't owe FEMA any more paperwork, and we're hopefully waiting for the check to come in, which is expected to be at $1.6 million. We've been, as Art knows, through the audit committee over the years, this is a very tough process. I can't imagine what towns in New Jersey or other parts of the coast who don't have the sophistication that we have for filing here are going through, or the lack of documentation. If it's taking us this many years, I can imagine there's towns or municipalities out there that are never going to get it because of the requirements from the federal government. But we're still waiting.
Okay.
In that, can I make two comments? First off, I think the best way to think about our reimbursement from FEMA is to hurry up and wait. If it happens, it happens. Don't be surprised if it doesn't happen. We have sent everything they've asked for. It's been reviewed, and there've been replacements of the process is the state of Connecticut actually handles it for FEMA. And the individual up in Hartford who has handled it has changed in the last couple of years, so we had to replicate some of the material that we sent to them. And it's just a hurry up and wait situation.
Yep. Just as a follow-up, you have a second point?
Well, the second point I was going to make is the audit committee at its meeting.
$1 million that we're getting back here. So to Art's point, it's a long process.
Move to accept the report, Mr. Chairman.
Motion to accept, do I have a second? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? 1200. Well, while we're on a controller's report, and I wish Lauren was here with us tonight, I need to report that Peter Minarski and the Finance Department has successfully completed their annual review, and thank you. For those of you who don't know, in the last year, we've had a new assistant assessor that we've had to go out and replace in that department. These are the departments that answer to us. Peter has been, we have a new internal auditor. We have a new risk manager. I mean, these are key positions for revenue for us. You've led the way on that. Ms. Oberlander and I did our review with Peter, and he told us all exactly what we have to do next year, so we're ready. I will tell you that we will be signing the forms, and I'm so glad that we're beating Raymer and Tarkington. That's the whole key here.
You want to sign them now?
So that's, I think, and I will say that, let's see, Jill did 99% of the work, and Peter did the other 99%. No, really appreciate it, and I wish Lauren was here tonight, and obviously, on behalf of the BET, I cannot thank you enough for everything you do. So I will leave it at that. So let's move on. Item number 6.
Move to accept the treasurer's report.
Motion to accept the treasurer's report. Second by Ms. Tarkington. Discussion. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining. Standing committee reports. I have 2. Let's do Mr. Lash first. Budget committee report.
So as you probably recall, there was a question as to whether the RTM would continue the process which allows the BET and to approve the budget for the Harbor Management Commission. As it turned out, they did approve that, and so the process that might have been put in place for next year didn't need to be put in place. Nevertheless, the Harbor Management Commission leadership came to the Budget Committee meeting and talked their way through their budget process. The situation that they find themselves in, which is unusual and good, is that they have currently about $70,000 that we have at one time or another approved, which was enough to get them not only through the current fiscal year, but also through the $40,750 that they would need in their budget process for next year. So we didn't need, and we don't need, to approve any more money for them. In fact, the opposite will be true. The difference between their whatever they spend by the end of this year and the $40,750, the sum of those two will be then subtracted from the roughly $70,000 that they have, and that money will go back into their revolving fund. It doesn't go back to the general fund. So they were happy, for reasons that elude me, to have us actually tighten up their budget to the amount that they want to be able to spend during fiscal 18 to $40,750. And that will just happen in the due course as the Finance Department closes up the books at the end of the year. And the process that we normally use for them is still in place, and so we can continue to use that at least for another year.
Thank you very much. And that one-page handout is in your package, so hopefully that helps them out. We're going to, I think as they get going, because they're in a point now where they're going to be starting to go before some of the committees on their draft plan, so we may have to see where that goes and see if we're getting involved in that. Still on item 7, Audit Committee report. Mr. Norton.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. First off, I'd like to bring to everybody's attention the fact that we distributed the internal audit report review of the parking services and the internal controls over the revenue. This was accepted in whole by the audit committee last Thursday at our meeting on June 8th. And it was posted later that day on the town website, and apparently through an oversight of internal auditor, it was not distributed as we thought it was to all members of the committee. You now have it. The other thing I wish to report is that the forensic audit engagement letter was signed last week by both Wayne Fox and myself, and the process is going to begin tomorrow with a meeting in the Controller's office at 2:30 with Mr. Richter, who's overseeing the auditor, and a Mr. Fitzgerald from RSM.
Okay. Ms. Oberlander, followed by Mr. Raymer.
Mr. Chairman, I just had a few words on this audit report, which, as you will read, is concerning in its findings. And I think I can speak on behalf of at least the audit committee members, who I think worked collaboratively to follow this report from its inception through its adoption, and just speak generally. I think, as we all agree, that public service, whether an elective office or a staff position, is a public trust, and that some of the recommendations as were made suggest that the controls that would prevent fraud, theft, appearance of favoritism, other concerns were not in place, and that residents and taxpayers must be confident that government employees are always working in the public interest, and that a suggestion of favoritism or impropriety can undermine this public trust. So I'm very pleased that the Audit Committee took strong action throughout the year to address this and has moved forward with adopting this report and for moving forward with the forensic audit. But I'm mostly speaking to publicly commend the work of the Finance Department under the leadership of Controller Peter Minarski, our new internal auditor Melinda Frame, and the police detectives assigned to this matter. Their diligence in raising this issue, investigating it, seeing it to completion cannot be underscored. And on behalf of all of the taxpayers that we represent, Mr. Minarski, thank you so much for your leadership on this, and I know that we will be following the implementation of these recommendations, particularly given the history. So thank you.
Mr. Raymer, before I call you, I just want to have one thing. Mr. Norton, as part of your report, the forensic audit begins tomorrow, and we believe it's about a 3-week process?
It's speculated, it was anticipated it would take approximately 3 weeks to complete. I don't know if that's continuous days going forward, or whether it's
Okay.
going to be spread and inclusive over a 3-week period.
Okay, all right,
That
thank you.
will, I think we'll have a better understanding and assessment of that tomorrow. I talked to Scott Richter. He actually left a message on my cell phone while I was in one of our meetings this morning, or early this afternoon. I called back to him, and he's more interested in finding out where the boxes are.
Got it. Okay, I thought that was an important point, because it's kind of a quick thing. Mr. Raymer, I'm sorry to interrupt you, sorry.
Not at all, Mr. Chairman. I want to be careful to be sure that we focus on the outcomes on this, and that somebody takes ownership of finding solutions. I mean, first of all, it was unfortunate that the copy of this report that went out to the BET never actually went out to the BET because of some email glitch. So that most of us didn't see it until today. But just quoting from the report, it's not a report that in the hour or so that I've had it, that one has had a chance to read, but it comments on how we did an audit back in 2003, nearly 13 years ago. I'm reading from the top of page 2, identified many of the same control weaknesses discussed here. Then it talks about how those controls were never implemented, and in 2006, we had an arrest. Then it talks about that there was a further audit that was done in 2014. Reading again, this report bore eerie similarity to the 2003 report, identifying the exact same control weaknesses that existed in 2003 and by definition in 2006 when the employee theft was discovered. Dropping over to the lower portion of page 3, as to their current findings of what's the circumstances today. Reading again, it says, it's our summary opinion that Parking Services' internal control over its revenue activities are inadequate to non-existent and require immediate remediation. The existing control environment is so weak that we're unable to identify a single auditable record to adequately support and document any of the revenue activities within the scope of this review, and it goes on. The good news is that we're seizing control of it, doing a forensic audit and trying to get answers. But the thing that I think we ought to be careful about is that we're now on the third round. Is there a possibility that after all of this, people will identify what the weaknesses are and what the measures necessary to solve the weaknesses would be, and yet they're not implemented again for a third time? And I think we should be careful as a BET to try and understand who is going to be taking ownership of the responsibility to implement these resolutions and see that they're done. And if nobody else is doing so, then we as a BET should be implementing some process by which that we don't have yet a fourth chapter of this problem.
Mr. Blankley, followed by Ms. Weissler.
In response to Mr. Raymer's last comment, which is well taken, and I speak as a member of the Audit Committee, at least part of that process for taking ownership will be the work of the Audit Committee and the review that we have directed the internal auditor to undertake in a few months' time to continue with that process. That's number one. Number two, the police officer who has previously been involved in procedures in that department is involved now in helping with the implementation of those new internal controls.
Ms. Weissler.
Pete, can you send us a copy of the engagement letter with the outside auditor for this forensic audit, just so we have a sense of the scope of what they're undertaking for us, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So on this one, Mr. Norton, would I be safe to say that until we get the forensic, we'll hear about this when we get the results from that back?
We will, the scope of the audit includes executive summaries to us as they progress, and I believe that they can be shared with the full BET. But to partially address the concerns that have just been raised, the reason it took so long for the Audit Committee to accept this is there are 22 recommendations that are included in here. I think the scope of this particular audit is more extensive than the previous audits to which reference was made. And until the Audit Committee was satisfied that there was acceptance by the Parking Services Department, we would not accept this report. And as you see, the date on the report is May 17. It wasn't accepted until June 8th. And the reason for that is we would not accept the audit and have it a public document until we were satisfied that all the recommendations were being implemented. Yes, it is the responsibility of the Audit Committee. The prior audits were not as extensive as this, especially the audit done, I think it was 4 years ago, were not nearly as extensive as this. It is the responsibility of the Audit Committee, and the Audit Committee works with an audit plan, which is done on a biennial basis, which is for the term of office in which we serve. And even though I have been chair of the Audit Committee for the last 10 years, there is a certain element of change within the membership of the committee. And we talk with the internal auditor as to which of the various areas should we revisit. There's a message being sent. I think it's being well heard, and I think it has been implemented in the past because we're only basically a one-person department, and the Audit Committee has the authority to investigate in all the operations within the whole town of Greenwich. that we do have an element of constraint as to what we can do. Message heard, message received.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion? Okay, item 8, I have nothing. Item 9, I have nothing. I'm going to have to ask for another little privilege. When I carried over new business from page 2 to page 1, it kind of got shortened. And if I may, I'd like to add back our fund balance debt policy to that.
You want us to add new business?
No. It was on there, but when I was in the process of moving the retirement board issue up to the first page, we moved that as the new business item, and my other item got caught. So typically, we do a 24-month debt policy, fund balance policy. The current one will expire at the end of this calendar year, I think it is.
It's something I thought we
Something like that.
It was September of 2 years ago is when you voted on it.
Okay, September of 2 years ago. So what I'd like to do is form a committee, a little change in how I'd like to see that go this year, because obviously I know Roland and Peter are involved. I would ask Ms. Moriarty, Mr. Raymer, if you would. I would ask Mr. Drake and Mr. Weissler to return to that. Ms. Weissler, would you chair that for me? Sure. My goal on this committee, so is to have a September report, including financials of where we are, because I know our current debt is, because of the New Lab project being delayed, we're definitely off. And I would ask the committee to, because 2 members of the committee are on the budget committee, I would ask that you keep, if you can, Mr. Lash, kind of in the loop on this. As a voting committee, though, it'll still be 2 and 2 to keep it balanced as we always do. But I would ask that you kind of do that so we have some continuity there, because a lot of what goes on in this committee will be as part of the draft guidelines. That's the reason I'm kind of thinking that through. So without any problem, if I could, is everybody okay with that? I'm just,
Yes.
okay? You know meetings have to be posted, you have to have all, okay, just checking, all right. I have nothing else under old business for tonight that I can recall. BET minutes, May 15th.
So moved.
Is that moved by Ms. Harkins, second by Mr. Raymer? Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? That is carried. Mr. Drake, do you have anything?
Nothing to report, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Norton?
I don't have anything to report, but I'd like to take a minute of personal privilege. I will not be joining other members of the BE to attend the PTAC dinner tomorrow evening. In the 12 years I've served on the board, this will only be the second time in which I will not be in attendance, and I think I have a pretty good reason. My oldest grandson graduates tomorrow evening. The ceremony is at 4 o'clock from Newtown High School, and it's going to be held at UConn, Western Connecticut State School up in Danbury. So I will not be joining you tomorrow evening, but I'll think about you, but I'll be more thinking about my grandson, Thomas Ryan Norton.
Congratulations. Do you have his college fund set up?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. I just, it's been a very busy month. In our caucus, I went over some of the different meetings and projects that we're working on, from Nathaniel Witherell to everything that's going on. But something very interesting I'd like to point out, and I'm going to pick on Mr. Turner a little bit, because it's really, this is important of how we work. So the new fellow steps up, investment advisory. And of course, the first reaction is, what's he doing? We got to get this, and does some really good homework. Causes our committee to have another meeting, and we live in a committee structure. This BET lives in a committee structure, not a committee of 12, but we live in a committee structure, and we rely on it. And I'm thanking you because as the newest member on the board, jumping in and doing that work, and to hear Mr. Norton, he's tough. Give you that compliment, I think that's important. But this is, with the law committee, you heard me thank Mr. Fox because I had some insight to make sure he understood how important I thought this was. The law committee, went to the law committee, I heard the discussion, here's what we need to get this done, this is important. Again, I just want to emphasize how important our committee structure is, and that we do have to rely on each other. We can't make all the meetings for everything, but you're hearing a lot about audit, you're hearing now the next group that we've started. So I really appreciate that, because we need to rely on that. We just can't cover all of these meetings. If you look, I've sort of done a little arithmetic getting ready for renominations. It's that we just seem to have more all the time, more items and more commitments. So that's just my 2 cents. So the next time you're wondering, did a committee ask that, I'm sure we're doing that work. So thank you. I really, it's stuck out. And there was 4 meetings on that item I couldn't make just in the last, maybe there were 6 meetings in the last week and a half. So I just want to say thank you for that. And, that just shows, how important it is. With that.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Good night. RTM tonight.